There she is.
Hi, Sabrina.
All right, I'm going to go ahead and mute myself just because I do not have speaking roles. Sabrina now has host control, so she'll have to admit everyone.
Okay.
Okay, I'm seeing where they are. I'm letting them in.
Hi, everyone. Hello. Welcome. We'll get started in just a minute. All right, everyone. Hi, thank you so much for joining us today. Welcome to our second Digital Inclusion 101 webinar. I'm super excited that you're joining us. Today's webinar is going to cover how digital inclusion is defined, why digital inclusion efforts are important, and the ways that you can advocate. My name is Michaela Perez. I'm a fellow with the National Digital Inclusion Alliance. We are a national organization, and I'm based in California. Before we get started, I wanted to provide a few webinar logistics. Please feel free to use the Q&A chat box to ask any questions. If I happen to miss any questions throughout the webinar, we'll have 10 minutes at the end to address any questions that I may have missed. Before we get started, I'll have all of our staff go around and introduce themselves, say your role, where you're based, and a fun fact, and I'll hand it over to Paula to get us started.
Hey everyone, good afternoon, good morning, depending on where you are. My name is Paula Balboa. I'm the Program and Data Manager here at Ndia. I'm in Brooklyn, New York, and a fun fact about me, we were talking about this yesterday. A fun fact about me is that I like to climb rocks. I don't find that interesting, but you might find it interesting, who knows. So I will pass it on to my coworker, Sabrina Roach.
Hi, I'm Sabrina Roach. I'm out here in Seattle, Washington, letting everyone into this party. I focus on engagement with all of you here at NDIA. And my fun fact is that I seriously auditioned for Annie in a drugstore parking lot when I was a young one. Miles.
Good morning, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Miles Miller. I am the Program Associate at NDIA. I'm based in Phoenix, Arizona. It's not really fun, but it is a fact. I'm originally from Cape Town, South Africa. And with that, I will throw it back to Michaela.
Thanks so much, Miles. So many of you might be wondering, as we get started, when NDIA started and what we do. So NDIA started in 2015 and was built to unify voices for broadband access, public broadband access, personal devices, and local technology training and support programs. We currently have over 520 plus affiliates in 44 states. We have 4 pillars. One is practitioner support, policy, awareness, data, and research. And Miles is actually going to pop a link in the chat where you can find more information on our website. So let's get started and let's get to defining what terminology is commonly used in this field. Sabrina, please feel free to take it away.
All right, I will try to continue to let people in while I talk to all of you. So digital equity, that's the goal. And digital inclusion is the how, like how we get there. The definitions that are on our website were created with affiliates, and we just acknowledge that this is an evolving, newer field, and definitions can and should evolve with it. We will talk a lot about furniture and legs, like stools with 3 legs, tables with 4 legs. That's really just to talk about how the solutions for this are multi-pronged and interdependent. So the weight falls on these multiple legs, however you define it. And they all need to work together to get toward more digital equity. And those are typically about home connectivity that's affordable, appropriate devices, and something about digital skills. Some might say tech support in that zone. Some might say digital literacy. A few more key terms. You'll hear us talk about availability, and that refers to physical infrastructure to be purchased, which is useful, but adoption is more meaningful to us as a measurement because it's people focused. It's about how people are using the internet and are they fully participating in all the internet has to offer. We avoid using the word access because it could mean either one. We find it to not be descriptive enough. Colin Rhinesmith for Benton Institute, which are both NDAA community members, has a more formal definition you can find on our website. Just a second as I'm letting folks in. It's a busy party. And I'm just gonna keep it there and go back to you, Michaela.
Yeah, thanks so much for providing some definitions and kind of an overview of what terminology is commonly used. So many of you might also be thinking, well, what are some solutions or activities to achieve digital inclusion? Paula, I'll hand it over to you so that you can elaborate more on this.
Sure, thanks, Michaela. Yeah, so as Sabrina mentioned, digital equity is the goal, right? We want to get to a place of digital equity. Digital equity means that everyone is able to fully participate in civic duties on the internet, and they're able to communicate with their family and friends. They're able to, look up a job application if that's what they need. However, there are some roadblocks there. That may be why some of you are here today. So when we talk about how we get to digital equity, we have to think about what Sabrina mentioned, the 3 legs of the stool. That's digital inclusion. That's the sort of work that we do here. The 3 legs of the stool are affordable broadband, affordable devices, as well as digital literacy training. These are the activities necessary to achieve digital equity. So by affordable broadband, as Sabrina was mentioning, again, just bouncing off of a lot of the useful things that she was mentioning, affordable broadband is a question of availability versus adoption. Another way of saying this is like, just because there are wires in the ground that make it available for a household to connect to the internet, what we know is that some households, many households in urban areas, don't connect to that internet. That's an issue of adoption. Maybe they can't afford the internet offer that is made, that's in their area. There are many factors that have to do with why a household may or may not connect to the internet, and money plays a large part in that. So we like to emphasize discount internet offers. One such example is Comcast Internet Essentials program. Miles, later in today's webinar, will be talking through a page that we've collected for you to look at that has a list of discount internet offers available across the country. Another piece of the 3-legged stool, affordable devices. NDIA has in our network an amazing constellation of local and national computer refurbishers. Miles will be walking through that page later as well. And then the 3rd leg of the stool is digital literacy. So this is a bit more of an elusive moving target. Digital literacy is essentially training on how to use devices and access and navigate the internet. Traditionally, places like public libraries have been a place that checks off all 3 boxes of these 3 legs of the stool. A public library has public computers. They have public Wi-Fi or wireline internet. And they also have staff trained to help community members get what they need. That's why NDIA, on our definitions page, we suggest the American Library Association's definition of digital literacy. Back to you, Michaela.
Yeah, so I just have a follow-up question for you, Paulo. How do you visualize the digital divide, and what data do you use to inform your work?
Sure, yeah, so one free and easy tool that we like to use to visualize the digital divide is called the I3 tool. I see that our friend Bob Balance is on the call. Shout out to Bob. Bob is with the Center for Internet as Infrastructure, and he helped develop this tool, which I'm going to screen share and demonstrate for you all in a few moments. Essentially, this pool pulls from data sources that we in the digital equity world like to refer to frequently. We like to refer to the American Community Survey, and we also like to refer to the FCC's Form 77, which, if you're unfamiliar, is the data set collected from internet service providers, self-reported on where they offer fixed and mobile connections. Again, this is a free tool, and it allows users like you and me to pull data, create maps, create bar graphs based on different municipalities, different research areas. So let me take a moment and share my screen here. Oh, Sabrina, is there a way to make me co-host so I can share my screen? Sorry, technical difficulties.
Try that.
No.
Okay.
In the participants list, if you click the button for more next to my name, you'll see an option for make co-host.
Uh-huh. Got it.
Perfect. Thank you.
Sure.
Okay, so I believe the link has been dropped into the chat here. And this is just one such example of research area that NDIA is working on now, Sioux Falls. So I've already logged in. I've already registered my free account with this tool. But just to show you a very short and sweet demo of what you can accomplish with this tool, we're looking at Sioux Falls in South Dakota. On the left side, you see data points pulled from the American Community Survey based on where we're looking. But we can further refine our research area by, for instance, pulling out another subject that we find in the American Community Survey, such as computing devices in the home. All right, so we get a nice visual representation, nicely color-coded with a corresponding graph to the left. And we're able to look at other measures of community health here on the left side. So for instance, if I wanted to see median household income, where it's lower, and how that overlays with lower counts of computer devices in the home. This is a tool that is nice and interactive, and it makes things super easy for us to be able to access. One more part of this screen share demo here is where you can find a quick summation of everything that I've just talked about. So here on NDIA's landing page, we have a data and research page from the top of our drop-down menu. And I'll put this link in the chat when I'm wrapped up here. But this data and research page features a few of the data-minded projects that NDIA staff has worked on in the past. But more important, we have a description of the data sources that NDIA likes to use when we like to visualize and find some facts and figures around digital equity. So a nice description of the American Community Survey, as well as a short description of the FCC's Form 77, which, as I mentioned, is self-reported from ISPs. So I'll drop a link to that in the chat box here in a moment. So quick summary, if you want the free version to tool around with visualizing data, the Internet as Infrastructure tool is amazing. Otherwise, if you or someone in your organization has a data person, you might want to direct them to NDIA's data and research page. If you don't have that capacity within your organization, we suggest you could also look into finding a partner who may be at a local research university. There's many options. Branch out, make some friends. Back to you, Michaela.
Yeah, so speaking of maps, Miles, you were saying that local governments have digital equity maps. Can you tell us more about that?
Absolutely, yes. So many local governments have taken these steps to map out digital inclusion data across their territories. And this has been done both in a static as well as an interactive way. What I mean when I say that is going to be best described by me also sharing my screen. So I'm going to start by doing that. You should be able to see what is a static map of New York City. And this is a map provided to us by the New York City Digital Inclusion Strategic Plan. And obviously, static being not interactive, it shows you the data in a non-interactive way. It's got a key on the side showing us combined home and mobile broadband adoption rates. However, there are also the interactive ones. And so as Paula just described, there are maps that you can kind of play around with. Another example of that is that of the city of Boston. And this is interactive in the way where you can kind of click on a census area, pull up a bunch of data about particular census areas. So I can get things like internet adoption rate, something that was spoken about earlier. I can see poverty rate, median household income. So what's the common thread here? Why New York, why Boston? Are those just arbitrary city choices? No, New York and Boston are two of what we at NDIA have come to call trailblazer cities. So what is a trailblazer? And the link to that webpage will be dropped in the chat shortly. Trailblazers is a Google Fiber sponsored honor roll call of local governments and their initiatives. That is the governments that go above and beyond their mandates and have found innovative solutions in their efforts towards digital inclusion. And this is a fantastic resource because the Trailblazers page serves as a cache of information, a cache of knowledge for all the documentation that these cities provide in order to be recognized as trailblazers. So I'm going to go ahead and start by explaining how you get to our Trailblazers page. I used to kind of just share my screen on the Trailblazers page. I figured that it would probably be more informative to show you how to get there. So this is the NDIA home screen. You click on the What We Do drop-down menu, go to Practitioner Support, let the page load, and you'll see a list of some of the wonderful projects that we do here at NDIA. You'll scroll down to Digital Inclusion Trailblazers, click on that link, and find ourselves at the Digital Inclusion Trailblazers page. And as I said, this is an honor roll call of these local governments that have kind of above and beyond the call and have been recognized by NDIA and Google Fiber. And this table over here shows all of our current NDIA Trailblazers. As for the documentation that they provide, and that amazing amount of information that is contained within them, to access that, you would click on these little plus signs, which are the drop-down menus to take you to that documentation. So for example, if I wanted to find the map of New York that we just looked at, I'd scroll down to New York City, click on their drop-down menu, and click on Internet Master Plan. And that would take me to New York City's Internet Master Plan. Now, the little tick boxes are indications of which city has which documentation available. So we see that cities like New York have every single document ticked because they have met every single one of the 6 indicators that we use to decide on whether or not a city qualifies as a digital inclusion trailblazer. And as I was saying, this is a fantastic resource for local governments that are looking to replicate or to get their own ideas about how work could be done in their sites and in their cities. So yeah, Trailblazer status is determined across these 6 indicators. It's also a product of efforts by working groups. This is not an NDIA dictatorship, for lack of a better phrase. We work with our community to determine what indicators should look like to best represent work done by cities, to really show and have a positive available on our site. Those working groups are both NDIA team members as well as Trailblazer applicants themselves. And for now, back to you, Michaela. And I will stop sharing my screen.
Perfect. So in the field, there's been a lot of conversation about redlining and digital redlining. Paulo, I'll hand it over to you so that you can define redlining and digital redlining, what the difference between the two are.
Sure. Yeah, so redlining is a term that has its roots in discriminatory practices in banking and housing that resulted in historically segregated cities based on race and or class. Redlining is the denial of various services or goods by either federal government agencies, local governments, or the private sector by selectively raising prices, again, based on race and class. This results in some of the most segregated cities that we see in the US today. When we talk about digital redlining, we're layering over that, that discriminatory practice, this idea of digital equity, or maybe lack thereof. Digital redlining is income-based discrimination against residents of lower income, usually urban neighborhoods, and the types of broadband services that an internet service provider can offer. So, for instance, giving a name to this practice gives NDIA and it gives our community the ability to demonstrate that availability and adoption, right? Going back to that dichotomy, availability and adoption to broadband is as much of a measure of community health as other categories like age, race, poverty, income, other stuff that you see in the American Community Survey. In 2017, NDIA published its first digital redlining report. We were looking at the city of Cleveland, Ohio at the time. We found out through our network of affiliates that AT&T was preparing to roll out a low-cost offer in Cleveland. One of our friends at the Ashbury Community Senior Center in Cleveland was an instructor who should have qualified for this discount offer from AT&T. He was income eligible, but he figured that he didn't have the minimum speed going into his house. So why wasn't AT&T's discount service reaching someone who should have been eligible for this? Our research and policy director at the time, Bill Callahan, he looked into this. He used those data sources that I mentioned before, and he found that AT&T actually didn't upgrade its wireline services to communities that were historically underserved. In other words, this was digital redlining as to a T. Bill used Form 77, that data set, to visualize this. Last year, NDIA published another digital redlining report along with the Communications Workers of America, in which we demonstrated that AT&T once again had made fiber in the home available for fewer than 1/3 of the households in its entire network. It was a big network scan, and by working with the Communications Workers of America, looking through their network, we found that, again, AT&T had made fiber in the home available for fewer than 1/3 of the households in its network. Yet another example of digital redlining. So it's a practice that we continue to see over and over and over again by some of the same names. So back to you, Michaela.
Yeah, so Paula really gave a descriptive picture of who gets excluded, and this really leads into how COVID-19 has created a sense of urgency to address this issue, but has also really amplified new efforts. Miles, I'm going to hand it over to you to really address how has NDIA adapted to supporting our practitioners' needs.
Thank you, Michaela, and my apologies in advance for the leaf blower in the background. So NDIA has created several pages in response to the escalating needs for information. My colleague Paolo had mentioned one or two of them earlier in this talk. The first is the state government COVID-19 response page. And this is a comprehensive overview of what states are doing on a statewide level. And that includes partnerships with state governments. And I am going to once again share my screen with you just to give you a better idea of what this looks like, as well as how to get there. So again, this is the NDIA homepage. We go up and click on COVID-19. It should take us to the COVID-19 resources page, and we'll scroll down. And the first option that pops up is state and local resources. The red hypertext that we want to go to get to the state page is state government responses. Clicking on that, that will take us to our state government COVID-19 digital inclusion response page. Our criteria for the state government COVID-19 digital inclusion response page determines whether or not a resource is listed on that page, and that criteria is internet access, device access, and tech support, spanning those three subcategories. Essentially, this is an alphabetized list of what states are doing on a statewide level. It is constantly updated, and let me add that this is a community-wide effort. Once again, this is not just NDIA. This is, for example, if somebody within our digital inclusion community came across a resource that they said, hey, this fits the criteria for this page, I think it belongs here, they're able to email me, I'm able to review it, and if it matches our criteria, add it to this page. Those emails can either come directly to me or on our listserv, which we will speak about later about getting onto. So scrolling down this page, we see that alphabetized list. The red hypertext will take you to the source information for what is being described. And all states are listed here. As information comes in, as I mentioned, it's reviewed, added to the page. The same is true of our local government page. And that too, we're going to get to our homepage, COVID-19 resources page, and where it said state and local resources, instead of clicking on state government responses, we're going to click on local government responses. The criteria here are similar: internet access, device access, and tech support. However, as opposed to an alphabetized state list, we have an alphabetized list of local governments. Once again, red hypertext takes you to the source information of what is being described. And as I said, this is a local focus. It's not statewide, it's now local government. So we've kind of zoomed in here on what's available. So if, again, our community members find or know of a resource that they feel may belong on the local government page, matches the criteria, they're able to email the listserv or email me directly and say, hey, I think this kind of matches the criteria, this might belong on the page, what do you think? And if it does, it's a valuable addition. So the fact that NDIA works hand in hand with its digital inclusion community makes this a really exceptional resource indeed. Back to you, Michaela.
Perfect. Thanks so much, Miles. Sabrina, can you also share your thoughts on how the field has changed because of the pandemic? You might be muted.
You're right. The mute sign is a sure sign of being muted. Thank you. Well, the field has changed significantly. I believe we had 250 or so affiliates when I joined NDIA as staff in April, and now we're at 520 plus. Back in November is when they published. I think they started the study in August. Colin Rhinesmith and Susan Kennedy, in partnership with Benton Institute for Broadband and Society, put together this very, very useful report. I put it in the chat. It's Growing Healthy Digital Equity Ecosystems During COVID-19 and Beyond. So there's a lot of data here. Oh, and it basically documents what the NDIA community has been doing during this time. And there are a couple ways in which this is sliced up. There's like the full report and just the sort of the summary. So I just encourage you to give those a read. Back to you, Michaela.
So our state and local pages are quite popular, but NDIA's free and low cost page is also most popular page of all time. Miles, can you tell us more about that?
Absolutely, and as much as we love our pages here at NDIA, we also love sharing our screens. So that is what I'm going to do. Share screen 2, and share. All right, so our free and low cost internet plans page, as Michaela had mentioned, our most popular page here at NDIA. Viewership has shot up recently. And again, we're going to start at home. COVID-19, scroll down, and second available on the list, beneath state and local resources, we have the free and low cost internet plans page. Click on the link, and it will take us to an interactive table. So this page depicts the current offers from ISPs intended to help low-income households find service at low or no cost. Information for these pages is, as with our state and local COVID-19 pages, sought after as well as crowdfunded through our digital inclusion community. This page is meant to assist our digital inclusion practitioners, community leaders, service providers, libraries, media, as well as any others who may give guidance to their clients and constituents. Sometimes people go, hey, I'm looking for assistance with regards to individual households. For that, we use and we encourage everyone to use a resource called Everyone On, and that link will be dropped into the chat momentarily. So looking through this page that I've shared on my screen, users would click on the plus symbol, similar to the Trailblazers page, to view the drop-down menus. So if I wanted additional information on Comcast and their low cost and or free plans, click on the plus menu, it would give me a drop-down menu where it would describe things such as the name of the plan, the type of service, the cost, and of course, very importantly, eligibility. Clicking on the red hypertext will take me to additional information such as, well, how do I know this is available in my area? Comcast has provided a coverage map. How do I apply? Clicking on the text will take you to that application page. And if I want additional information about this resource, clicking on the Internet Essentials website under more information for Comcast will do that for me. So again, a list of our low and no cost pages. Once again, NDIA sourced as well as crowdfunded. Contacting me or shooting it through the listserv, we will be able to review it. And if it's something that we feel is applicable to this page, will be added on. Thank you. Michaela, back to you.
Yeah, so I think Sean is joining us now. Feel free, Sean, to hop on and just give a quick brief introduction, and then we can go ahead and address the question that I have for you about what is the federal government doing to support or should be doing to support digital inclusion efforts.
Hi, sorry, looking for the unmute button. My name is Sean Davis, Jr. I am the Research and Manager Policy for Ndia, and I'm based here in Washington, D.C. And did you get into my question, Michaela, or did you not want me to go into that yet?
No, go ahead and feel free to address the question really around what is the federal government doing to support or should be doing to support digital inclusion efforts.
Okay, gotcha. So first I want to say that NDIA communicates with our affiliates to assess the issues on the ground, and then we take that data and information and confer with our colleagues about how to create and advocate for policies and legislation. So we take what we hear from our affiliates, and then we go to the federal government, or we go to our colleagues and figure out how to best represent our affiliates to different federal agencies. And so one of the biggest ways in which we've done that is advocating on or around the COVID Relief Act, otherwise known as the Consolidated Appropriations Act. And in it, there are 5 pertinent sections, one pretty major provision known as the Emergency Broadband Benefit Program that is slated for $3.2 billion. And while I have you, I won't go into too much detail, but what I will do is put the overview of the bill of the COVID Relief Act into the chat for those who want to get a better idea and better understanding of what's in that bill and just what the different federal agencies like the FCC and the NTIA are doing to help promote and support digital inclusion efforts. The other major legislation that NDI has pushed is the Digital Equity Act, which was introduced in April 2019. And it proposes to authorize more than $1 billion in federal grant funding over the next 5 years to support digital inclusion programs throughout U.S. states and territories. So we're expecting to see a new version of the Digital Equity Act in this new Congress. And between the Digital Equity Act and the Consolidated Appropriations Act, there's lots of work and lots of advocacy on our part to do. So back to you.
Perfect. Yeah, let's transition a little bit back to you, Paulo, on how has digital inclusion programs adapted during the pandemic?
Yeah, this is a really good question. Last March, no one really knew how to adapt to the COVID-19 pandemic, whether you're in normal life or if, in context of this question, we're working in existing digital inclusion programs. So the question is how is a computer center going to continue to offer that sort of service to their community members in a time when we all have to be socially distant? Over the course of last spring and last summer, NDIA asked our affiliates, how are you guys doing this? What is working? More important, what's not working? And over the course of spring and summer, we had a bunch of working groups, and we're peppering them with questions, because ultimately NDIA wanted to update our resources and update our guidance to share out with the rest of the world. Here's a list of best practices. Again, here's what works when you're trying to adapt something like digital literacy training in a socially distant time. So we revised a guidebook that we had originally published in 2018 called the Digital Inclusion Startup Manual. We updated it with a sponsorship from our friends at Chicago Connected, and it provides detailed guidance on the creation of community digital inclusion programs for individuals looking to increase access and use of technology in their communities through digital literacy training, affordable home broadband, and affordable devices. Again, those are the three legs of the stool. The completed revision of the Digital Inclusion Startup Manual, which I think the link is in the chat if it hasn't been already. The completed revision was published in September of 2020, so it's still very, very fresh. All of this reflects the conversations that NDIA had with our affiliates. Best practices around digital inclusion programming in the age of COVID-19. Our affiliates were figuring out in real time how to continue their services remotely. So let me just show you, as Miles mentioned, through a screen share, how you can get to the startup manual from our homepage. So most of the stuff that I've been talking about is you can find through this What We Do drop-down menu, right? That data and research page was here below. Practitioner support is where a number of publications can be found. So you can find a digital inclusion startup manual through practitioner support, but you can also find it. It's also just on our homepage because it is still so fresh. So sorry for the scroll, but about halfway down our homepage, you'll find this link for the startup manual. And here's a web-based version of the startup manual. It's broken up into 8 different chapters. 2 chapters that got a lot of attention last year when we were focusing on updating the startup manual for COVID-19 best practices and protocols were Chapter 4 for digital literacy training and Chapter 8 for building long-term sustainability for digital inclusion program. If I click through on Chapter 4 here, there's a table that I want to show you all really quickly. Again, sorry for this scroll, but about halfway down Chapter 4, we've updated and included a section called Adapting to COVID-19, along with a super, super useful table of free digital skills training materials. This is a robust list. It's not completely comprehensive. It is slightly curated because we were asking our community, like, what do you guys like to use? But these are some that we like. These are crowdsourced and these are verified by our community. So clicking through on any of these links in the program column here will take you directly to that page, and you'll be able to see and access free digital skills curriculum for you to use, ready to go. Some of these, or most of these resources rather, have instructor materials, meaning that they have separate guidance for, you know, if you are running a digital skills training program, if your instructors need some guidance on how to deliver the materials, several of these resources have those materials as well. So again, super useful, and we wanted to put it in here in one chapter for you, make it as easily accessible for you as possible. So back to you, Michaela.
Yeah, actually, just a follow-up question for you, Paulo. Can you talk a little bit about digital navigators and what they are?
Yeah. So digital navigators, also COVID related. Digital navigators is a model that NDIA is developing and actively improving upon, again, with our national network of affiliates. Very briefly, a digital navigator is someone who's trained to, you know, assess a community member's need and then be able to guide them to the resource that will address their need according to their computer skills and their lifestyle. So there's a lot of empathy going on in the work of a digital navigator. For instance, a community member may, before last March, let's say, a community member may have had a question about, you know, filling out an application form for unemployment. Where would they go? If they were me, if that's me, I'm probably going to the local library and asking the person behind the desk, like, hey, this is my question. Can you help me walk through this? Now, in the age of COVID-19, we all got to be socially distant, responsibly. So a lot of these sort of interactions still need to happen, right? Like people's needs don't go away. In fact, they may be exacerbated, but a lot of this has to happen either over the phone or over a video chat like this. So there's a lot of opportunities for barriers to access there, right? Like if you're a community member and you're like, I need help filling out this job application, you might need some additional help with someone who's hovering over your shoulder and helping you out. A digital navigator takes all of that into account and does it all over the phone. So this is tech support. A digital navigator utilizes each of the three legs of the stool. So if a community member needs help getting signed up for a discount internet offer, a digital navigator is going to say, okay, I got the one for you. They might need help getting a device in their home, maybe like a Chromebook or a tablet. A digital navigator will know the area well enough to be able to say, okay, you have this computer refurbisher right next door, or maybe the best option is Best Buy, right? The digital navigator is just there to share, to open up that flow of back and forth communication. I see Cindy's question here, and that is great because that gets to my next point here. Like, who is a digital navigator? A digital navigator can be, so we're seeing this in a few different, evolve in a few different ways. A digital navigator can be a staff member who is already, can be an existing staff member whose role is expanded within an organization. So for instance, we're working with the Salt Lake City Public Library. Some of their digital navigators were folks who were already doing computer training online. And the digital navigator roles and responsibility that Sabrina mentioned in the job description is just added on. It's part of the work that they're already doing. Elsewhere, and all of this is like according to capacity in your organization. A digital navigator can be like an AmeriCorps or an AmeriCorps volunteer or a Vista volunteer. It all depends on what you and your organization are really capable of taking on. Digital Navigators is designed to be replicable. Anything that we as NDIA have created out of the several projects that we have going on, we intend to share just broadly with everyone. So any documentation that we have, any forms, assessments, etc., we intend to share this with you all because we want you to be able to plug and play on our website and just say, like, okay, this works over there, but this may not work for me. So here's a broader scope of how the ecosystem looks. That's don't want to go too deep, but that's the overview of digital navigators. I'm happy to chat about it more over email. Back to you, Michaela.
Yeah, thanks so much, Paulo. Sean, I'm going to hand it back to you. What does this mean for work on the ground, and in terms of thinking about who is digitally excluded?
Sure. So that's actually a really good question and a great segue, because the groups that could benefit from digital navigators and some of the other resources that we offer are low income, people who are on the lower tier economic status. Based on data from the American Community Survey, 36 million households in total are without wireline internet access. Of course, wireline meaning fiber, DSL, cable internet service. Now, 26 million of those homes are in urban areas, whereas 10 million of those homes are in rural areas. And so what we've also seen is that US households that don't have a computer or tablet in the home, and this population make up over half of US households without a device of any kind. Back to you, Michaela.
Yeah, so NDIA wrote a paper around digital equity and digital inclusion that was released back in June 2020. I was really struck that the majority of residents in households without broadband access in urban data sets were people of color. Sean, how does this paper align with what you're telling us regarding the difference between availability and adoption?
Sure. So let me say that according to the Pew Research Center, the communities that have the highest percentages of being offline, like I mentioned before, include low income, which is less than $30,000 a year annually, high school dropouts, Black and Latino families. And so NDIA, as you mentioned, wrote a white paper called Limiting Broadband Investments to Rural Only Discriminates Against Black Americans and Other Communities of Color. And in that paper, we highlighted the excessive focus on broadband deployment and broadband availability into rural areas, and the lack of focus on all of the other communities and other causes of home broadband non-connection, especially the cost barrier. As I mentioned before, the cost barrier is the chief one of the biggest reasons why people aren't connected. In the paper, we argued that this policy framework ignores most of the nation's unconnected households and can have only a minimal impact on the most serious effects of digital inclusion in education, the job market, healthcare, and just social equity in general. The other major barrier to digital inclusion, so I mentioned availability and I mentioned affordability. The last major barrier is digital literacy. For example, we learned from one of our affiliates, the National Skills Coalitions, that Black workers comprise 12% of all workers, but represent 15% of those with no digital skills and 21% of those with limited digital skills. And so digital literacy, along with affordability, along with availability, are the three major barriers to digital inclusion. And so what we basically see is that there's a direct correlation between income and home broadband adoption, and that affordability is a major, major barrier along with digital literacy, along with availability.
So before we go into Q&A, Sabrina and Miles, can you tell everyone the ways that they can engage with NDIA?
You first, me first. You may be muted, Sabrina. Okay, I'm gonna assume that means I go first. Okay, so how do you get involved? You be our friend. How do you be our friend? You can join NDIA at www.digitalinclusion.org/join. An easier way for me to show you that is to share my screen. So ignore the stormtrooper for a moment. Let's say I want to get involved in the digital inclusion community. I go to get involved, join the community. And this is going to give me the option to do several things. One, I can sign up for the newsletter. This is the least information intense option. If you don't want to be bombarded by all the incredible projects and things that we're doing over here at NDIA in association with our digital inclusion community, sign up for the newsletter. However, if you do want to be bombarded with those emails, sign up to be our friend. This will give you access to the newsletter, as well as access to the community listserv, as well as our bi-weekly community calls. And these are both excellent resources and fantastic discussions about what is happening, cutting edge progress made, some really fantastic discussions that happened on those calls as well. You could also become an affiliate organization. That gives you access to the newsletter, access to the community listserv and community calls. And you are also going to be listed on the NDIA website and provided with an NDIA affiliate badge. What does it mean to be listed on our website? Well, we actually have an interactive map that shows where all of our affiliates are located, along with all of their information. This will also give you the opportunity to do things like apply for grants that have come through NDIA. We just had a grant application deadline pass where one of the criteria was to be an affiliate. So opportunity to get ahead, apply for the grants, potentially make some really good money. Speaking of money, you could also become a subscriber. Now, don't let those numbers daunt you. It says 100 to 500, but that's because it's a sliding fee. The price that you would pay to become a subscriber is dependent on your organization's revenue. And to become a subscriber, we have, or we rather bestow onto you all affiliate benefits, discounts to NDIA events like Net Inclusion, invitation to monthly subscriber calls, which is kind of a community call plus, as well as invitations to NDIA working groups. We want your input. We want you to be involved in our community. by clicking on these, it'll take you to an application page, fill in the information. You will receive a confirmation email once your application has been processed, and have access to our newsletter, our listserv, community calls, and if you so choose, our subscriber calls.
Thank you, Miles, for helping me out with that. So as you can see, there are multiple ways to join this community. It's very important to us to make it accessible and for there to be multiple entry points for where you're at. And if you don't see yourself in any of those groupings, just contact us and we'll figure out something that works. We have community calls on the first and second Fridays of the month. They started off as COVID calls and we were doing them every week. But now we're spacing it out just a little bit more. They started very informal. Now they have a little bit more structure. We invite a few speakers, folks who have a new model or a resource to present for 5 minutes without slides, and then do a Q&A. This is also where we have of the moment information sharing and conversations. And we sometimes mix sudden informational calls on breaking news like the emergency broadband benefit. For example, we'll have a segment on the emergency broadband benefit during each community call coming up, probably for many months. But when it was first announced, we had several informational Zoom meetings about it solo, in addition to the community calls. So signing up for the community call is so easy that it's confusing. You get on the listserv and then we'll send out a promo email to the listserv. And in that promo email, there will be a link you will use to register. And you might need to make your own calendar invite. That's the rundown on that.
Yeah, sorry. So I know we only have a couple of minutes left for Q&A. If you have any questions, please feel free to unmute yourself or post them in the chat, and we can use these last couple of minutes to address any questions that you may have.
Well, I'm Cindy Hogan. I'll talk for a minute. I am an AmeriCorps volunteer, and I'm trying to figure out how to work with people that are not connected. And I keep, like I said in the chat, I keep wanting to send them to websites with links to, services or inexpensive or free services. And when I go to try and even log in and pretend I'm one of those people, I find the process really, really onerous. And I just wonder if people aren't all over the country throwing up their hands and just don't know what to do. I know that digital navigating is going to be a really important part of this process, because I think people that aren't digitally literate are going to find it really difficult and really need that hand holding. And while it's a digital issue, I think it's going to have a people solution. That's my.
Yeah, I completely agree, Cindy, on the people, the emphasis on people helping each other solve this. And that's where Digital Navigators comes in. Something that I should have emphasized a little bit more is that part of the work of being a digital navigator involves having those connections that NDIA helps facilitate between a place like PCs for People. They're in the device refurbishing world. They're certainly not the only player, but they're one of the biggest. So higher up in the chat, when Miles was mentioning free and low cost internet offers, that page includes other PC and device refurbishers. So other places to look. I'm also happy to talk offline about it as well, but yeah.
So I see a question in the chat from Sean, which I think this might be great for our Sean to address. And it says, does NDIA have any policy foci working with any elected officials? And I'll hand it over to you, Sean.
Hello, sorry about that. So, in terms of our policy priorities, working with state officials, I know that, let me be honest and say that I do not believe that we have any policy priorities, but we are working on our 2021 policy priorities and our action items, and we'll definitely broadcast those and put them up in a blog post when we have them completed.
I would say that the whole national landscape of organizations is shifting around state support on policy. So I think you'll see a bunch of different things happening in the next year as everyone sorts out what kinds of resources they have for helping at the state level. I think we'll see a lot more state leadership. I'm happy to talk with anyone who's interested in state policy. I do a lot of volunteer work here in Washington State on digital equity policy. Anyone else?
So I see another question from Sarah, and it says, when looking to close the digital equity gaps across the US through policy, would you suggest working at the local, state, or federal level? And I think that that might be a great question for Angela to address.
I think it'd be a great question for Sabrina to address.
I'm a big fan of state work, honestly. And if you're doing state work, you can't help but do city and county work. I think there are just so many, it's just that the field is wide open for leadership at that state level. And then there are often really great experienced folks working at the city and county level. Sarah, I'm wondering where you are.
Hi, Sabrina. Thank you for answering my question. Maybe just a little bit of context and background. So hi, everyone. I'm Sarah. I work for PwC, but I'm currently engaged with CEO Action, which is basically a coalition of CEOs and organizations looking to do meaningful work in the public policy space. Currently working to look at how we close the digital divide. And I guess the mandate given to us is, if we're looking from a policy perspective, I'm curious as to at what level we can make the most meaningful level of change. It sounds a little bit like, to me, it might be depending on where I'm in New York City, so that's where I'm located. But it sounds like with the COVID relief package, for example, I think that's at federal level. I could be wrong. I haven't gone too deep in the policy, but it sounds like there's lots of different ways in which we could tackle each three of those areas. But Sabrina, just given your background, just curious to where you think it would make more sense.
I put my email in the chat. Feel free to reach out to me. I think we could have a great conversation about that.
Thank you.
If I may respond to Yulia's question, I don't know where loan to own may be available, but what I will say is that I will find out and contact you directly.
Thank you, Miles. Thank you.
Perfect. So I see that we're a little bit over time, and I want to be mindful of everybody's time. Thank you so much for joining our second Digital Inclusion 101 webinar. We encourage you to share this resource with other colleagues that are new to this work. Please check out our Net Inclusion 2020 webinar. I'll go ahead and post that in the chat. And please feel free to reach out if you have any other additional questions that you would like us to address. Thanks so much, everyone.